been faded down, which can only mean one thing. It's time for the meetup. So please, there's an empty seat up here. I see a couple empty seats if you want to sit. Otherwise, I'm not responsible for your sore feet. All right. This is by far the largest meetup we've had here, and I am very excited. So I'm going to take a picture. So everybody do a face or whatever, and you will forever be immortalized in our Instagram stories. All right, ready? 3, 2, 1. Yeah, oh wow, what a good looking bunch. Okay. So it's a good thing you're all here because we're taking a break for November and December because we're tired, you guys. We're so tired. So this is our last meetup for the year. That'll give us a couple months to recoup and plan what we're going to do next year, which is going to be even bigger. Hopefully not too much bigger, but we don't have room. Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about one of our meetups that we have planned for next year later. Upcoming events, we have Animation Next. I'm going to show a trailer eventually. You know what, I'll just show it now. By eventually, I mean in about 10 seconds. So Animation Next is, it's 7 short films that are going to be screened at Trilon on November 9th, and here's a trailer.
Working on a new project.
Can't wait to meet him.
Je voulais un enfant.
Yeah! Animation! So please come to that. November 9th, it's a Saturday at 4 p.m. Tickets are available on trilon.org, which you can find by going to nicemoves.org. And there's this big image right there. Click on that. You get some tickets, $10, and all proceeds benefit Nice Moves. So not only do you get to see 7 short, awesome animations, you get to feel like you're part of the community by giving us some money so we can do stuff like this. Thank you in advance. What's next? Oh, Minnesota Electronic Theater. Let's go big again. Okay. That's going to be at the Poorhouse, November 21st. It's the Thursday before Thanksgiving. It's kind of a professional showcase, but you know, we have students, we have independent categories. Come out, mingle, and see all the awesome work that all the studios in town are doing. Find more at nicemoves.org. Calls for submissions, MET. I think I just talked about that. We need all your submissions so that we can have stuff to show, because MET is all about us and everyone out there, but not too far out there, you know, kind of in the Midwest area. Glass Animation Festival, they are the ones that put together the Animation Next program. So if you liked what you saw in that trailer and you're like, I kind of make stuff like that, submit it to Glass. And we're on social media. We got an Instagram, which you are all a part of now. I'm going to have to freaking tag like 50 people. And we're on Discord. If you use Discord, yeah. Salary survey. Go check that out. Mike, did you have anything you wanted to say about it?
No.
Oh, okay.
The results are up.
The results are up.
Yeah, and it was the most responses we've had for a survey in the 4 years we've been doing it.
It's the most responses we've had out of the 4 years we've been doing it. So thank you all. The survey would not be as awesome without all of you. I did forget one thing, upcoming events, Hellevision, a late entry. We see a fist pump. Hellevision is going to be November 16th at 2 p.m. at MCAT. Thank you. See, Nice Moves really is a community effort here. Results. Yeah, you can go nicemoves.org/salary survey to find that. And tonight we have Greg Stewart all the way from right there. He's Canadian, so that's, close enough. Okay, I should introduce someone else first. I'm doing this all out of order. I'm sorry, everyone. We have Catherine Campion. Casey Lewis is also here. We met these fine folks at Catalyst Content Festival, which we talked about for a while, and they are voiceover artists and on-screen talent. And they want to talk to you briefly about how you might be able to use their skills in your animations.
Yeah, and not just us, like all union talent in Minnesota or even internationally or around the United States if you find those people. So Casey and I have both been in the union. I've been over 20 years. He's almost 20 years in the union. We're both working professional on-camera and voiceover talent. We've also both done a lot of student films and low-budget films where you can pay your talent little to nothing for the day, but you're using professional actors. Then if your thing happens to make a lot of money, you can come back and pay us, but if it doesn't, you don't have to pay us. So it occurred to me recently that there's all these on-camera contracts for students and low-budget films, and I wasn't sure if those applied to voiceover, to see if people like you, I think a lot of you are students or independent animators, can you use union talent in your projects for little to no money? And Casey has the answer for you.
I have the answer. So we have a wonderful rep in Chicago. That's where the Twin Cities office or talents run out of, the SAG-AFTRA office in Chicago. And I spoke with her. Her name is Kathy Byrne, and I'm going to give you her contact information in just a sec. She's an enormous wealth of information, but I spoke to her earlier this week about the various contracts that animators, content creators can use to employ SAG-AFTRA members. So just real quick, there are basically four options. First is a student film agreement. I understand there are some students here as well. It's basically the same student film agreement that on-camera actors would use, which allows for animation. Projects must be student films that satisfy course requirements at an accredited educational institution. Projects must be under 35 minutes in length, and the budget must be under $35,000. So those are, relatively low-budget projects. Actors are paid $125 per day, and that pay is deferrable. Basically, the actor can negotiate to either take less money or no money at all, but who would do that if they were an actor when they could make money? So that's a student film agreement. So any students, if you're at an accredited university or institution, you don't, the institution doesn't have to have an agreement with SAG-AFTRA. The student can contact SAG-AFTRA themselves. Again, I'm going to give Kathy's contact info in just a second. Then there's a short animation agreement. There's no public information out on this. So if you tried to search it on SAG's website, you wouldn't be able to find it. They try to keep it hush-hush. But maximum budget of $5,000 and a length under 5 minutes. Actors are again paid $125 per day, and again, that pay is deferrable. Kathy's information, if you want to get more information specifically on this one, again, her name is Kathy Byrne, B-Y-R-N-E, and that's kathy.byrne@sagaftra.org. Then from that point, there's the basic agreement, which is what most professional producers would be using for short or feature-length projects that go to either film festivals or theatrical release. And there is no time limit or budget restriction. And the day rate there is $1,005 per day for up to 3 voices. So basically you get an actor for the day and they give you 3 voices. Any voices beyond that would be $294. And then of course there's the television animation agreement, which if you've signed with somebody and it's in production and such.
Then they can talk to our agents.
Then
You don't
then
need
you
to
can
worry
talk to
about
the
those
agents,
contracts.
and you can if you were to put together an incredible piece and under the short animation agreement, and somebody bought it, then and they were going to do it on television, then you would contact SAG-AFTRA and then negotiate up to that television animation agreement, and you'd make a lot of money, and everybody else would make a lot of money, and we'd all love working with you. Those are the agreements that are available to animation creators.
Yeah, thanks so much. So yeah, just know that you can use working professional talent for your low-budget projects, and don't let the union scare you away from it.
They're there to help.
Yep, thank you so much.
Thank you. So that was the meetup I was alluding to earlier. Next year we'll have a longer one of these about SAG-AFTRA and why VO, professional VO talent is awesome. Even though you're awesome for recording your voice in your bedroom or whatever, these people are professionals. So this thing is an iPad. We are giving away 1 copy of Cyclops. If you're not familiar, I have the link right here. That actually didn't show very much, did it? So Cyclops is this stuff, where you save out a GIF, but it has all your nulls and your motion paths and whatnot. You actually see that in action later today in Greg's presentation. But yeah, we're giving away one of that for free if you put your name on this iPad, and if you enter your email, you'll also sign up for our newsletter. But your email is not required to enter the giveaway. And we will give it, let's say 8 o'clock. So get your name in the iPad by 8. And now that brings us to Greg Stewart. I hope you're here for Greg Stewart. Oh my goodness. Okay, I heard someone in the audience has a show and tell. I'm looking at you, Maddy. You should get up here. Yes. Do you have a link? Do you want me to pull it up?
I emailed it to you, to the Nice Moves account. I don't know. It's been a while since I emailed you. Hi, I'm a motion designer at a production company called Mightier in Northeast Minneapolis. And I feel like we're kind of secret because we're not able to come to a lot of these things. We're literally 3 people on the animation team in our whole team of 15 people. So a pretty small company, but we've managed to crank out way too much stuff for 3 people. So I just wanted to share something that we made recently, and hopefully you guys will enjoy it.
Is it?
Yeah.
Nope.
That looks good to me.
Care is a complex ecosystem made up of care providers, insurance plans, and most importantly, patients. When each part works together in harmony, the ecosystem thrives. But when any one part is thrown out of balance, it becomes unsustainable. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Minnesota is working to bring sustainability back to healthcare. Fighting for your healthcare dollar, making sure it's being used for the most appropriate care at a fair price. Let's follow your dollar through this healthcare ecosystem. When members pay a premium to their health plan, it collects into a pool. That pool covers costs associated with a wide array of healthcare services, from annual checkups to cancer treatments, broken bones to prescriptions, covering costs for everyone in that plan. As a non-profit, Blue Cross puts more than 90 cents of every dollar directly towards paying for that care. But the cost of care is skyrocketing in our state, creating an environment of unsustainability. According to the Minnesota Department of Health, the cost of care is expected to double by 2026, and physicians estimate that 20% of care is unnecessary. Blue Cross is here to protect our healthcare ecosystem. Our care management team of more than 250 doctors, nurses, and other health professionals work with providers to help ensure our members receive the high-quality care they need at the right time and place for a fair price, so you can keep doing your thing. Together, we can make our healthcare ecosystem sustainable for everyone and create a healthier state in the process. To learn more, visit bluecrossmn.com/sustainability.
Marshall. We have more exciting animations, but that one took us a week and a half because we were under a crazy deadline. So that's why I shared that one. Here you go.
Yay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maddy. Do you know if you used a SAG-AFTRA voiceover talent for that? Let's just say yes. Didn't that sound great? Okay, we are receiving items from Greg Stewart as we speak, so I just got to... Okay. Okay, so I can introduce you now? Are we good? So Greg Stewart hails from Canada, but he has captured our hearts here in Minnesota as an animator at Open Book for 2 years by himself, crushing it. Went freelance. 8 months later, he's like, guess what? I'm going to start a company with one of the most awesome people in the industry, and they are called Ordinary Folk. And you will, if you have not heard of them, you will definitely know them by the end of this presentation. And as of 1 week, Greg is a United States citizen. So let's give it up for Greg. Greg, where are you going? Greg, don't run away. I need you. Okay. So Greg Stewart, everybody.
Just had to get that over with now.
Is this stable? Yes.
Make sure, is your phone?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if I'll actually use this, but we'll see. I have my notes on my phone. Nice. Okay. First off, thanks everyone for coming. A lot of you. It's intimidating. Super excited to be here and to get to share a little bit. Thanks to Emery and Alicia for having me and for all they do for Nice Moose. Community is just so important. There's just so much that we have to learn from one another, and things like this are just really awesome to be able to do that. Actually, ironically, I was remembering as I was getting ready for just thinking about this presentation and easing and thinking about, animation. I actually met Emery and Alicia when they were back at Neighbor probably like 3 years ago, and I just wanted to connect with some animation people, had emailed them and dropped by, and Alicia, I don't even know if you remember this, but you guys were just giving me some like behind the scenes and some projects that you guys have done, and I was just eating it up. And at the end, you're like, by the way, like you're pretty good. Like your easing is good. And I was like, what, really? So just sort of like ironic that here we are talking about smooth animation. So thanks for having me, and I guess we'll get started. So who am I? Picture the screen back here. It's there. I work as an art director and animator at a little studio in Vancouver called Ordinary Folk. Right now it's just 4 of us, but pretty much we've never just done a project as only 4 of us. Pretty much always hiring freelancers. So if you're a freelancer, I'd love to meet you. Yeah, I love my job. I feel like I work with like some of the best people, not just in terms of talent, but just the kindest, most helpful people. I've learned so much from them in the last year. And so a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about was stuff I probably wouldn't have even like been able to articulate a year ago. So I just want to say I just think they're awesome, and I'm so humbled to be working with them. And next week I'll be there full time. So moving from Minnesota, which is a bummer, but it'll be good. So these are some screenshots from projects that we've worked on in the last year. I picked ones that were all from ones that I've animated because they're my favorite. But yeah, so we did one of the big projects we did this year is a manifesto video for a School of Motion, which was an insanely hard piece, but it was pretty fun to do, and we'll have a little bit of behind the scenes for some of that. So just before we like really dive into sort of like the technical stuff, there's just like a couple kind of like overarching thoughts I wanted to give just to sort of frame the whole conversation and to sort of set y'all's expectations for kind of like where I'm going to take this train tonight. First off, I'm still figuring things out. I mean, so many of the things that I'll be sharing tonight from behind the scenes were like, it took weeks to figure it out, or it was years of figuring other things that played into that. So I never look at a style frame and know exactly how it's going to work out. And even today, I spent most of the day trying to figure out how to animate a sine wave with just expressions. And I feel like I have nothing to show for that. So yeah, still figuring things out. And I feel like most people feel that way. So we're all in this together. But so even though kind of what we talked about initially when Emery and Alicia and I were talking about this was doing like a lot of like technical tips and tricks, I think like really where I'd like to start is from more of a conceptual standpoint, because none of the like hot tips of like numbers for easing or any of that like really are useful unless they're supporting a concept or an idea. And so I kind of want to talk in some more like broad principles about how to like approach animating things that and then sort of funnel into the more technical stuff, so that hopefully that will just like be linked to a bigger idea and it might become more useful. Because honestly, like sometimes like things shouldn't move smoothly. If the concept for your piece is that it should feel stressful, then like it probably shouldn't be smooth. So let's talk about smooth moves, but not poop. When someone said smooth moves with Greg, that was like going to be the original name for the event. I was like, that sounds like poop, so let's not do that. So the first thing I want to talk about is just like a concept. Have one. Pretty basic. But I just think that like everything when it comes to art, and what we do is art, even though it kind of lives in the commercial world, should have meaning and purpose to it, right? When I worked at OpenBook, I had never been asked the question like, why is it moving this way? And like the first time I got asked, I was like, why are you asking? Like, it looks cool. What more do you need to know? But through asking questions like that, you have to learn, oh, like this is meant to communicate something. And so you have to just be able to think about like, what am I communicating through this movement? And so every piece should have a concept, even if it's like, I just want to make something that's cool, that at least gives you a parameter like, is this cool? No, then it doesn't serve the concept, so let's throw it out. So like for commercial work even, there should be some sort of concept like I want people to know this, I want them to feel this, I want them to do this. There just has to be some kind of thought on the front end of a project as to like what the goal is. So again, how should things move in light of that, right? Like I mentioned, if the concept of your piece is you want to communicate like order out of chaos, then at some point things should feel chaotic. And if they don't feel chaotic at some point, then it's not going to get your point across. So sometimes like things might want to feel happy. And that could mean things are moving in a skippy fashion. I was going to get like corgi gifs, but I didn't have time. Sorry. Or it could be sad, and that might mean it's moving slowly. Or excited, and that might mean fast. Or literally can't even, which I don't even know what that means. But then sometimes you also deal with this on a shot level, right? Like, so you have a concept for a piece, but then there's a shot, and that has to mean something. And so just as like an example, this is a slide from a piece that we did for Webflow earlier this year. And there's some things where you look at it and you sort of get immediately like, oh yeah, that means this. And, you know, like the idea for this one was like this ball is going to go around and like bring these things into life. This was another shot that we did where I looked at it and I was like, it shapes. I don't know what that means. This is a tunnel. Tunnels are my favorite thing. I love animating tunnels. Every time we have a project that has a tunnel in it, I claim that shot. I literally think there's been a tunnel in like the last 4 projects we've done. But like this one is maybe a little more self-explanatory, right? Like it's a scene of hills and trees, so kind of makes sense that they would move like in the wind or something. But the point of all this is like just have a concept. On a shot level, on an overarching level, like you have to have rules and parameters, and not necessarily like rules, because rules are sometimes made to be broken, but some sort of idea of like things should move in this way to communicate this bigger idea. And what this does is it helps you establish a hierarchy. I know in design we talk about like using value and size a lot to sort of communicate like this is more important than this because it's bigger or it's more bold, and we have to do that in animation too. But we also have at our disposal time, or how much something moves to draw attention to it, right? So when you're looking at a shot, you have to think about, okay, what's important here? Is this the most important thing? Is this the most important thing? Because if you start with the details and you go crazy with those, then you're going to take away from the big idea, and then no one will know what you mean. Which is, if you want that, that's fine, but I feel like probably people don't want that. So the second thing would just be to like start with one thing. I think like a lot of the projects that I've worked on in the last year, there's been some style frames that I've looked at and kind of wanted to crap my pants because I don't know where to start, or there's just so many details. But you have to start somewhere, right? And so I think like one of the most important things to do, especially when you want like something to feel smooth, which isn't just, it's not a matter of just using the graph editor to make something move in a way that's elegant. Like the whole shot has to feel smooth. And so if you have like something moving smooth in the background, but your main thing isn't moving smooth, then it's not going to feel smooth. So start with one thing and start slow. I like to think of the analogy of when I was growing up, I learned classical violin. I'd like to think it wasn't my choice. I wanted to learn drum set, but here we are. And if you wanted to learn to play something fast, you had to learn to do it slow first. Because something slow can be sped up and it's still the same thing, but it doesn't necessarily work the other way. So it's good to start slow. And start with one element. I think like going back to this piece, just sort of knowing the concept for the overarching piece is we want to show users that are free from the chains of having to learn code, able to bring their ideas to life. And in this shot, the idea is that this ball is the user, and it is bringing shots or these things to life by like smacking them or touching them. And so then it would make sense, okay, since like that's kind of the main character of this shot, I'm going to start with animating that, right? And you know, then it's going to, eventually these things are going to look like this. But had I just sort of decided, or had we as a team decided like it's just going to have one movement and everything's going to change at once, like that might be kind of overwhelming. So it helps to start with one thing. But like I said, sometimes you have shots where there isn't like a very obvious hero or character, and in those cases, sometimes it helps to break it into chunks. This is one of the frames that I looked at, and I was like, I don't know what to do. Those are a lot of shapes. And we ended up, as a team, I think like 4 of us took like a bunch of these things and just animated them and we comped them. But like, when I opened up the Illustrator file and when we like looked at it as a team, actually Jorge probably figured this out, but it was like a bunch of just these like patterns of this shape or this like group of code. So again, like looking at this thing, it looks really overwhelming, but when you break it down into a chunk where it's like, okay, I can start with this, and then that ended up just being duplicated like a bajillion times. What is this? Oh yeah, so this is what that ended up looking like. But yeah, so that was kind of fun. I guess this is the same thing. I don't really know how Keynote works, just FYI. Cool, so yeah, and if you can't do like one chunk, then start with one piece. So this was a shot from a project that we just put out last week for an organization called the Bible Project. And again, there isn't like really an obvious hero here or thing that like makes sense to start with, but does it? Nope. Yes. Okay. So this is like where it ended up after literally several weeks. But in this case, I decided to start with a tree because the tree seemed interesting, and kind of started with that, kind of got a style for this is kind of like the windy feel I want, and then applied that to pretty much everything else. So And then just as a plug for Cyclops, this is kind of how I built that. I rigged it. I probably didn't need to. I feel like I tend to rig things for the joy of rigging, and then it ends up kind of biting me in the butt. But this is also Cyclops, so kind of some fun keyframes and shapes. Anyways, or just start with one property. Again, like I think things can be overwhelming when you start a scene or start a shot or start a project, and you just have to start with one thing. So sometimes it's just position or rotation or scale, but probably not all three at once. Simplify. I think this is actually like one of the hardest things to do, honestly. Kind of what I mean by this is like sometimes it means trying to feel as few movements as possible. So especially when you're thinking of transitions between one frame to another one, it can be sort of overwhelming to feel like, okay, this has to move over here, and this has to move over here, and this has to move over here, and this camera has to rotate this way. And there can just be a lot of things that have to change at once. But I think trying to sort of think about how can we make this like feel like a cohesive thing as one move, or maybe a group of moves so that it's not like you're feeling 100 different things, because that just visually gets overwhelming. So a question that like we'll ask ourselves a lot as a team is like, can we make this feel like it's one movement? Or can we simplify this so it's not like the camera is pulling out and then moving over, so where it can kind of like whoosh, we use sound effects a lot, but like, you know, move and it just feels like it's one movement. And I'll show some like more practical examples of that. So, and this kind of ties into that, but it's like blending movements, or a way you can think of that is overlapping multiple movements. I'm sure there's a lot of character animation familiar people in here. It still freaks me out, so I've done it like once, and I'd rather not try again. But it's something that's very important to that. And so I'll just kind of show what I mean by this in a non-character way, because I don't do that. So like feeling something simple is not the same as it being simple, right? And so this was from a project I did. It's like my first freelance project, but this is a transition where like this first frame with like the kind of different panels, it had to transform into this book, and it rotated. And so had I thought through, okay, like all these things have to come into the middle, the whole thing has to rotate, we're going from like a 2D feel to a kind of 3D feel. There's just like a lot of, like we're adding Z depth to this thing now. Like there's just a lot of things to happen all at once. And so just trying to approach these things one by one. So just to kind of show where this ended up, again, like the goal is like I want this to feel like it's more or less like one movement. It didn't like 100% hit the style frame, but that's fine, that doesn't matter. A lot of times like a style frame is just to help you get from point A to point B. And so like practically just to show the curves for this, I feel like this is so nerdy. This is what the graph editor looked like. So again, like if you watch it separated from the curves, it I think like feels like it's one kind of like one movement. Does it keep playing? But if you look at the curves, you can see there's like three groupings, right? There's kind of like that first peak where everything's moving in, the second peak where it's rotating, and the third peak where the cover opens. And so like something to point out is that not all the peaks are lined up perfectly. Right? Because I think if everything is lined up like mechanically, it doesn't feel like natural or organic, and that's not the feel I wanted in this shot. But I don't know how much you can see that. I don't see how big the screens are. But the curves, like the first keyframes for that second peak, are starting at the same time as the other ones. So that means that those moves are like overlapping. That rotation is starting like long before the things are actually all in the same place. And so having those keyframes actually overlapping means that like as one movement is finishing, another one is already starting, rather than like finishing one and then starting the other. So like when I say like blending movements, that's kind of what I mean. And then it's just like a bigger picture of them. So hopefully those are visible. But again, like even though these things aren't all like lined up perfectly, it's still like a cohesive movement because there's an order to them. And even like the height is decreasing. So there's kind of like a bigger movement, and then the other ones are a little smaller. Next thing, make moves that make moves. I should have said make nice moves that make nice moves. But so I think like what I mean by this is like cause and effect. So how can we like be relating movements in our scenes to each other, rather than like we've got this cool thing going on over here and there's another thing over here? Because like you have to show people what to look at, right? Like same principle in design or art. Like people need to know where to look, and sometimes that's through like a lot of really subtle things. It's less like, it's more like I'm going to drop this layer back by like 10% opacity because it's just kind of distracting from this other thing. But the same thing applies to like actual movement too, and not just the design. So going back to this shot from Webflow, and the concept is that like this orb thing is going around and bringing each of these things to life. So this is kind of like a clear example of like this movement is causing these other things to move. And so we want to make this feel like digestible so people can watch and understand what's happening. So it's going to go from this to this. And we don't want that to all happen at once because then that wouldn't really communicate the idea. So does it play? No. Cool. Yes, it does. So this is where it ended up. And so going back to the idea of like starting with one thing, the first thing that we animated here was the ball moving around because we knew that was going to be causing everything else. And then we had everything else transform after that. But so again, like on a technical level, like the curves for all these movements are happening like after it hits, right? Because like this thing hits it and then those things change. It's not like this thing hits over here and everything else over here changes. Like we want these movements to feel connected and feel like they're related to each other. Fun fact, these are all animated in After Effects. But I kind of have like a bad habit of avoiding cinema because it feels intimidating. So I just do things the hard way in After Effects and it takes longer. But sometimes it's fun. It's like, haha, didn't use cinema again. Yeah, so another way to think of like these both last two things is just like combine movements where you can, like overlap keyframes so that it's not like we move here and then we move here, but it's just more like, I don't know what that means, flowy. And then connect things where you can. So that like things are related to each other and there's relationships between movements. And I think if you look at the real world, like that's how things happen, right? Like if a car hits on the brakes, like the wheels and the tires are going to feel that first, and then that's going to go up into the car, and that's like what's going to cause it to shake back and forth. So there's an order to things in physics and in nature, and so like that probably should apply in animation as well. Next thing, getting a little more nerdy here, but the graph editor. I love the graph editor. My tip for this is use it at all. I like motion is great, flow is great, Duik has like the sliders and stuff, like those things are great. But I think that like it's just a good thing to be familiar with, and there's some limitations to those tools as well. If you use motion, like it doesn't actually let you adjust the angles in like the value graph or like the the speed of the speed keyframes. So it's like sure it gets you like maybe acceptable results a little bit quicker. Like I use it sometimes, but I think if you really want to get like have control over your animation, like don't avoid the graph editor. And when you're in it, if it looks smooth in the graph editor, it's going to look smooth in the comp window too. And so kind of a thing that goes along with that is just like avoid having flat curves. Like in a value graph, like you don't want the handles to be like perfectly flat unless it's coming to a stop, just like bump them a little bit so it keeps moving. Or in the speed graph, like you don't want the keyframes to hit 0 unless it actually needs to stop. Like if a ball is moving, it should kind of keep moving. Another random little tip is use other like peaks to place other movements. So like going back to those early examples where you could see the really clear peaks. If you know you've got one element that is causing these other things, you've got like a really clear example of, okay, like this is where that movement hits, so like everything else should come after that peak. Or if you're animating to audio and you have like markers in your timeline for where the waveform is or like where the beats are happening, then you can line up the peaks of your speed graph with those beats, and that kind of helps things groove a little bit. So just getting into like a more specific example here, I'm not sure if you can see like the position keyframes and stuff because I don't know how the contrast is on those things. But going back to this scene, like this was the first thing that I animated, and because it was the most important thing. And so this is the graph for that. I love looking at graphs. So like a couple things that I think are interesting here is that like there are places where it actually hits 0 and bottoms out, and that's because it's actually, the idea is that it's physically hitting a thing and making contact. And so it would actually stop in that case. But for the most part, it doesn't, like these other keyframes along the bottom, like they doesn't actually ever stop moving. And so something that is kind of helpful for doing that as you're planning out how something is going to move is to place the keyframes like spatially at the points where the speed is going to change. So again, I don't know how well this is showing up, but basically I just tried to think, okay, it's going to make contact here, and then it's going to bounce back and go here, and then it's going to move over here, put a keyframe here, it's going to make contact here, rather than just kind of like drawing out the path like you would if you were like drawing a thing, but just trying to think a little bit more intentionally about this is where the speed is going to change. So say it's moving in a loop, like, okay, where is it going to be at the slowest? Probably at the very top. Let's put a keyframe there. Make all the other ones roving if you need to have them to like adjust the path. And that way you can take the keyframe for the position at the very top and drag it down, and it's slower, and it's just going to feel more natural. So just putting thought into curves, and here's graphs again. The transform box. This is something I talked about at Blend, but I think this is like one of the best features in the graph editor, and it's just makes things really easy. So, and another way I think of it is like a keyframe by itself doesn't do anything, right? Like you have to have, like animation happens when you have a keyframe at one point in time and another keyframe at another point in time. And then you play with the curves to make it move in an interesting or less interesting way. And so like as you're adjusting animation, you should be adjusting the relationship between 2 points and not just 1 point. So a nice feature about this transform box is that you can scale the easing as well. So if you look at the curves, like they're actually adjusting as you're scaling the whole thing. And so that means like you might have spent a ton of time getting this easing to look just the way you want, and then you move one keyframe and it screws everything up. But if you grab a couple keyframes and use this transform box, there's like a little button at the bottom of the graph editor to enable it. It preserves the easing. And so you can use it to stretch it in time, you can use it to stretch the values. It just makes editing things a lot easier. You don't have to go back in and tweak all these little things to get back to where you were. Yeah, so now we're gonna get into like the more like really specific things. And I kind of wanted to like leave this whole thing on the shorter end of things, because I brought some project files that might be fun to dig into. But so these are gonna just be kind of like more specific things. One thing is use more than 2 keyframes. I think like, sometimes you're like, I'm going to put like 88, 88, and it's going to feel smooth, but like that doesn't always do it. And so there's a lot of cases where like, sure, you want something to move from like left to right, but only having 2 keyframes isn't really gonna, you're just limited in the amount of moves you can do. So I recorded just like a little example of like, here we've got 2 balls and they're moving and like the easing is fine, but it's also kind of like vanilla. And so using that transform box, you can just add in a couple extra keyframes and then like tweak it a little bit. So now like it's moving in the exact same amount of frames as the other one, but it's just a little more interesting. It starts a little slower and then snaps a little more. And so sometimes it's just like helpful to use more keyframes. Sometimes it can get overwhelming if you use way too many, but I think generally like don't feel limited to having just 2 keyframes if you want something to feel smooth. Something I do a lot if something is popping in, and it's got one of those like curves like that, is add another keyframe close to the top and then stretch it out so that like you never really feel it stop moving. And those are like the little things that can go a long way when you want something to feel like, oh, there's like constant motion here. This is a favorite of mine. I call it null chains with a Z because that makes it more cool. And I actually learned this by picking through a Phil Borst project file. If you don't know who Phil Borst is, he's ridiculous at everything. And apparently super nice, but I haven't met him. So the idea here is that like we have a ball that's parented to a null, that's parented to another null, that's parented to another null, and you could go on and on. But basically that like each one of these nulls is gonna do one of these moves. So we've got this thing moving like, in like a loopy thing. But to try and do all of that, even just like on the position parameter of one layer, you just have to spend a lot of time like tweaking things and getting things to like look just right. And then if you want to change it, then you have to go back and change all those things again, and it's kind of annoying. But when you kind of like create a null for each move, you can just take that null layer and move it around, and then the movement changes. So if you wanted to like make that last one a little longer, you could just drag out that keyframe. And because these things are overlapped with each other by a decent amount, you still have a pretty good looking animation. And that means that you can, so like this was just like, I use an expression to grab the position and spit it into a curve. And so like, I didn't really spend any time tweaking the graph. I just did like a little bit of easing, and I like even like that second scoop there, like that would be kind of hard to do with keyframes, with like just on one parameter. But by using a couple different nulls and then blending those movements, it makes it a little easier to get something that kind of feels just a little more smooth and natural. This is a nerdy one, but adding expression sliders to properties. I'm going to try not to get like too in the weeds here, but this was a shot from our like, hey, we're a studio video that it was like, I don't know, it's shapes, what does it mean? But it was like a pretty simple looking style frame, but kind of hard to figure out what to do with. So another Cyclops render is actually all nulls to paths. In each one of those triangles, it's basically just one that I animated with nulls, and then I mirrored it 3 times because laziness. But also then, like, if you want to change something, it's going to affect all the other 3, and you only have to edit 1. So what I want to focus on with this is just this orange null here. Like, it's not doing a crazy complicated move. It's like moving up and then down and back up. But I think like sometimes, especially when you're animating things that are supposed to look like natural, there's competing forces, right? Like a leaf is falling, but there's wind. Or something's like moving up and there's gravity. And so it's like, how are you supposed to capture all of those things in like one property? I don't think you should try, because it's hard, and why work hard? So again, without getting like too crazy into expressions, basically you can just go onto like a position or rotation or anything like that, and then pick whip to another property. I'm just kind of assuming that people know what that means. And you can just type in like value plus. So if you add value into an expression, it means it preserves the ability to edit the original property. So you can still add keyframes on position or whatever, but then also have like another thing affecting it. So like practically this null, like when I slide this slider, it's going to move it up and down. But when I slide this slider, it's also going to move it up and down. And so that means that I can have keyframes, like 2 things doing the same job, but I can say, okay, for the move up, I want to do that on this slider. And for the move down, I'm going to do it on this slider. And then I can blend them, because that does it. So again, this is like literally the expression that I use for that. It's not crazy complicated. I know expressions can be kind of crazy and intimidating. But what this does is it allows you to have keyframes, and like you can use keyframes on the position parameter or whatever you've got the expression on, and have sliders as well. So this like middle curve is just like the post. That is like the curve for that null after that slider has been added. And so, you know, it stays pretty smooth, even though, you know, you can just like move these things around. So like, and again, that wouldn't be like crazy hard to do just by adding keyframes, but like, I think just like from a logical standpoint, it's nice to have like movements separated out. So you kind of like, oh yeah, right, this is doing that. And then like it just stays smooth even though you're like moving things around. So that can be useful when you want to do like simple looking movements that just have like more than meets the eye to them. And then more Cyclops stuff, because Cyclops is fun. Ironically, so I had to use, when you're using nulls to pass, sometimes it can be annoying because if you like rotate something, it doesn't actually like work. So I had to animate it with a transform layer. But because this shot had noise underneath it, I didn't want the noise to also get scaled and rotated, so I had to make it green and then key it out. The things you have to do. Yeah, and haha, one shape. I always feel like I'm winning when I do something like that. Like, I don't know, I just pulled something off and that was smart. Expressions. I love expressions. That's because I'm a nerd, and that's okay. But I just think like they let you break After Effects to do whatever you want in a lot of ways, or do things that are like really hard or impossible. There's a ton of great resources out there. School of Motion is coming out with an expressions course, which is going to be good. And there's a guy on YouTube, it's like Animoplex, Animoplex, but like tons of free stuff, and you can learn all sorts of things. But I'm just going to touch on a couple of my favorites, and then you can Google them and learn more if you want, or ask me about it, because that's cool too. Value at time and random. Love these. So this was from that Bible Project video. Basically, there's like these flowers that were flying around, and I was like, I don't want to animate all of those. That sounds like a lot of work. But I would animate one thing. So essentially what happened was I animated one null and made it do that like swoopy move. And so it's just position and rotation. So it's 4 keyframes on 2 properties, so 8 keyframes. And then just use, so value at time basically says like grab this other value at a specific time. And then if you put random in that time, then it will make it a random time. So then you have all these things that are moving, they're inheriting like that exact movement, but it like offset in time by like a totally random thing, and you can like control how random that is by like positive or negative frames. And then you get all these things moving in a way that looks like kind of natural and individual without having to actually animate all those things. I just think it's easier to keyframe one thing than like 12. To comp and to world, these are kind of weird, but added with sliders. So this is something I use in a recent project where I needed to have something moving, but then like get parented to something else. And you can't keyframe parenting in After Effects because After Effects is dumb. But I wanted to be able to do that, so I decided I'm going to make it do that. So again, without getting like too in the weeds, basically to comp or to world is going to give you like the absolute position of a layer, whether it's parented to something or not, because when you parent it to another layer, it's going to give you a relative position, like relative to how far it is from the parent layer. So essentially like this orange ball, we'll call that like the parent layer. And so just by adding an expression that says like, okay, give me that position and like spit that out into a number, and then give me my own position and spit that out to a number, and then you can use a slider to go from when it's 0, it's going to be my own position. When it's 100, it's going to be that position. But then if you have it at 50, then it's like inheriting part of the movement. So again, like this is something that After Effects I think should be able to do. And just with like a couple expressions, you can kind of make it do something interesting. But this way, it was like some like shapy blobs moving around. And so I was able to have something like move towards the thing that was moving the other way, but then like partway through just become parented to that, and it didn't look bad. But I can't show it because it was for a big tech company that shall remain nameless. But you could search for them online. This is a super nerdy one, but it's maybe my favorite right now, is using arctangent will calculate the angle between 2 points. So in this, this is like kind of like the base rig for that School of Motion tunnel. But basically I was able to use that to calculate like the angle between like the corner of one of these comps and the corner of the one inside of it, and then skew the shape so that it would, like all the points would stay connected. This is one of those things where I probably would have just been easier to manually do it, but I just really wanted to figure out how to rig it, so I did. And this thing was so heavy, and that's why that shot took me like 2 weeks. But it's kind of rewarding at the end to be like, haha, I figured it out. So yeah, but that can be useful like if you wanted to drive like the angle of a drop shadow with a null. So you could say like, oh, I've got my layer here and a null here, and if I move this null around, it'll change the drop shadow. And then these are maybe the most, I don't know, sometimes they're useful, but I really wanted to animate something without using keyframes. So I made this, which is just all 2D shape layers scaling up. But it's using an exponential scale to make it scale exponentially, because you know, if like someone in the back waves their hands way far back there, it's doesn't seem like a lot of movement, but then in front of my face it's going to be more, and that relationship is exponential. Or if something moves like farther away from the camera versus closer, the difference is exponential. So having it scale exponential makes it feel 3D, and then using a sine cosine to make it do that. But it's like still a smooth thing because you're just using math. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I had. Again, I wanted to keep it on the shorter end. This is my first time presenting, so if I was not good, it's okay for me to say that. But yeah, so I wanted to open up to questions. I brought some project files from that tunnel and some of the Webflow pieces that I showed, or just questions in general. And I'll just say thank you now, again. And sip my low battery mango flavored LaCroix. Yes, Migul.
Speed editor and value editor.
Yes.
I find myself using the value editor a lot more than the speed editor, and
Yeah.
I guess I want to pick your brain on like when you would use one or the other.
Right.
Yeah, I've never touched the speed editor. So.
Yeah, why not?
What am I missing out on?
Oh, so much.
It's weird and confusing.
Yeah, I think that generally the value graph is more intuitive. I loved calculus in high school, and so for those who are familiar, like the speed graph is the derivative curve for the value graph, and so it kind of made sense to me. But I mean, there's some properties like position, if it's not separated, where you don't really have an option, or like mask paths. I think I use the speed graph when I want to see the peaks, because you can kind of sense like when the angle is at its sharpest point looking at the value graph. But if I'm wanting to sync something up to like waveforms, or see like, hey, this is where, like squash and stretch, if you're animating that manually, knowing like, okay, because that's like the apparent change in scale is caused by how fast it's moving. So how fast it's moving is speed. And so being able to say, okay, like it's really clear right here is how fast it's moving. So like there, or a frame or 2 frames after that is where I want the scale to be at its extreme as well. Or if there's sometimes where I've like used like a speed value at time expression on like an echo to make something like auto smear as it's moving. So when it's moving faster, it's going to have like more copies. And so then like being able to eyeball that in the speed graph can be helpful for like writing the expression. But I mean, they're both like 2 different ways of doing the same thing, really.
Any other questions? One up front here. So when you come up with your ideas for content, you sketch them out first, you just kind of know what you want to do, and then when you take it to the next step, you find yourself trying to figure out as you go along, or you just, again, is it more intuitive of a process? And how do you
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yes, to all of those things. I think it depends on the situation. I think there's some things where there's always a certain amount of figuring out. I don't think I've ever had something happen where I look at something and I just know exactly how I'm going to do it. Sometimes it's like, I think this is probably maybe how this would work. I think it's more often than not better to write ideas down before you're in After Effects, because at least for me, I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but when I'm in After Effects, I'm already my thinking is already limited by what After Effects can and can't do. Same as like why I tell people like don't design in After Effects. Like 1, because it's not meant for that, but 2, like you're just going to be thinking about, wait, well, should I use this effect or that effect? And I mean, I think like the whole creative process is like starting big and like funneling in. So yeah, I think it just depends. But I usually try and like make a mental list of like, what do I actually need this to do? Because I have this problem where I just like go rig things, and then it's like I didn't need to do that. That was pointless. And I wasted not wasted. I had a learning opportunity for 3 days where I could have just manually done that in a day. But writing things down helps me think about like, okay, I need this to do this. Okay, I don't need to rig that. Or like, I need it to do this, 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 and this. Okay, I might need to rig that. And so just trying to like, at least make like a mental list of like, this scene needs to communicate this. This is the concept. I think this is like my main thing that I'm working with here. Just having some of those things like written down can kind of help like dictate, okay, maybe I do need to like try this in cinema. Or, I need to do this other thing first. So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
Actually, if I could just ask one.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you find yourself rigging, and assume now your work may require just a little bit more revisions potentially.
Yeah.
For clients,
Yeah.
You find that the rigging is maybe a little more beneficial on the back end if you have to make a change versus having to.
Yeah, there's some reverb. There's some clients specifically where it's like, I just know they're going to want to change the colors like 100 times. And so, or I know they're going to want to like swap out this icon or whatever. And so I think if you work with clients consistently and you kind of know, or it's like a certain kind of, or it's like a live event or something where like stuff is just going to be crazy until the last minute. And like depends on the project too, like graphics packages, like definitely want to be using essential graphics or things to rig things up. So it's like I can change the name, I can do this, I can do this. No problem. Actually, that tunnel thing, I use like an essential graphics rig. So like each one of these, if you think of it like in terms of squares, each one of those is an essential graphics comp. So I can pick whip like the color for each of those 2 sides. The final thing had gradients, so I could like move the gradients around. just because I might need to make this thing longer or shorter. I don't want it to be a pain to add more segments to this tunnel, so I'm just going to make one comp. And it was probably, I don't know. It was just a tough shot. The rig was super heavy, so it would take forever to do anything with. But this GIF was sped up probably by 30 times. My laptop isn't that fast, but all those expressions and all those comps. But yeah, sometimes it's just better to rig things.
So he's going to be leaving for Canada, and he's not going to come back for a while. So if you have any questions, now's the time.
Now is the time.
Nothing?
I saw two hands. Yes. Oh, you want to? Okay. Yeah. Funny story. Didn't go to art school. I have a degree in Bible and theology and a double minor in Spanish and ancient Greek. And those come in so often at work. Not really. We do work with some religious companies, and we've done some pieces with an organization called the Bible Project. So, but that's kind of ironic. It's oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about because I studied this. But yeah, I mean, real quick, my last year in Bible school kind of was just I don't really want to go do more of this. That's a whole other conversation. But still sort of had a desire to help people think about things, and just sort of saw, man, people who are working in the media industry are changing the world, they're influencing how we think about everything. And everyone is entitled to work on whatever they believe in. I really believe that should be the case. But I saw really good videos done for really good nonprofits, and I was wow, oftentimes these are the companies that have the worst branding, the worst websites, and it's so depressing because they have the best idea for building wells in third world countries, and just thinking they could benefit from good design and storytelling more than anybody. And so I ended up just I was interning with a college ministry, doing moving text things. I was oh, this is so much fun. Did a little film stuff, but just sort of realized you can't, some people aren't very good on camera, and you can't fix that in post if they don't know how to communicate. So animation was I have all the control, I can do all the things. And I was just really fortunate to work with really talented people. At Open Book, people taught me a lot about meaning in things and not just making stuff that looked cool. And then obviously working for Jorge, he's amazing, and Victor is amazing, and they teach me things all the time. And I was homeschooled, so I kind of learned a lot of stuff on my own. So I think that kind of helped. But yeah, I think there's just a lot of looking at stuff that was really good and be oh my gosh, how do they do that? And I'm gonna go and try and figure it out, and then come out with a less good version, but it was a little bit better than the last thing I'd made. And you do that long enough, and you can kind of fake it till you make it. So yes.
When you were working on the left bow piece and avoiding using cinema, were you using 3D layers in After Effects, or were you taking it completely using 2D layers?
Actually, that was my first project I used cinema on. Yeah, it was for a different shot. Does this computer have internet? Yes. So I did, I promise I'll answer your question.
Today,
Whoa.
the world runs on code.
Nope, don't need
Every
to hear it.
text you send.
Okay, yes. So the shot that I did I told Jorge, I need to try cinema, so just let me try something. Was this shot here. So all of the geometry was animated in cinema, and then all the textures and lights and stuff was done in After Effects. I actually might have posted a behind the scenes. I feel kind of self-conscious pulling up my own Twitter account. But yeah, became a citizen. Let's clap for that. Where was it? I love posting behind the scenes stuff. It's now my favorite thing. Wow, guys are really getting a look into my life. Okay. Oh, it doesn't work.
probably just taking a second to hold it,
Okay.
hopefully.
Well,
We'll follow him on Twitter at J.
it's okay. Wait, do you have Safari? Safari. Jorge always makes fun of me because he uses Chrome, and I guess most people use Chrome, but. Oh, wait. I swear this is going to make it make more sense. Yes. Okay, Chrome. So yeah, the geometry is animated in Cinema. And then Duick has like a 2D camera rig. So it lets you basically like parallax things. And so I use that to animate the textures that were comped on top of the balls there. And the reason for that was like, and if you take like a flat texture layer and move it through a ball, it kind of looks 3D, but it also like very much looks 2.5D, and it's not very convincing. And so because with Cinema, we had like a specular pass from like the lights in Cinema where I could see like where the highlights on each sphere was. I could basically just like track that with this like 2.5D rig. So it basically just makes like you move a null and things kind of follow it at different rates. And so that meant that for that project, like I could get like really cool textures that I wouldn't have had any idea how to do in Cinema, but then comp them in After Effects and still have it like respond to 3D geometry. What was your original question though?
The scene following this,
Oh yeah.
where you had mentioned not wanting to use them.
Yeah.
I wondered if when you your layers, if they were 3D After Effects layers or 2D layers.
Why don't we look at the project file? What if this laptop didn't have After Effects? That would be embarrassing. Yeah, so that was all. I used Element 3D for like 2 things just to like extrude them a little bit. But other than that, it was all 2.5D layers. Yes, I would like to allow that. Thank you for asking. That's okay. So, yep, okay. This is why Cavalry needs to come out yesterday. So like for instance, this, actually let's maybe look at this one. So this is like a phone that like moves over and rotates. Yeah, again, like part of me is like, I literally just should have done this in Cinema because it probably would have taken less time. But like in terms of this, there's not a lot of things that actually had to like really exist in 3D space, but for this I just made like a box out of some different layers. I don't know why it's looking at it like this, but and then I could just like on that one layer put the anchor point in the back and then scale it in Z, and it would, So for something as basic as that, it was fine to just do it in After Effects. And then I, these like just put some shading on top of it so that it would look more 3D. And those are just using a set mat so that those are just multiplied on top. So yeah, it's basically all 2.5D layers. Which are 2D layers existing in 3D space. There was wow, that's not what the particles looked like in real life. Like this house thing that was supposed to represent Airbnb. Like the design had this like 3D looking thing here, but then when it rotates, it was supposed to maintain like the angle towards the camera, which is technically, like the thing would have to skew. So I made it do that. Nope. Yeah, so basically these are all like 2D layers that are positioned in the shape of a box, and then I just added some sliders so that I could like rotate these like this and up and down. And So then like I could have it like as the thing was rotating, it would still kind of like make it look like the camera was facing straight into it. And then like the side of the house, that's just like an animated path. So yeah, it's just like a bunch of things just kind of like smushed together, and then it looks okay, which is everything that we make. So yeah, like this chimney thing that's just a path. Those are just paths animating. So.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah.
I think we're out of questions. Did you want to show the sneak peek?
Oh, yeah. Unless there's another question. About to leave for Canada and then never come back. So. Ooh, oh, there's two. Matt Stark.
So I've been curious, how far back does your design sense go? Like when you first got into design, I know you're an animator, primarily,
Yeah.
and you haven't been like full designer on a whole lot of projects.
No, I'm the least of all designers. I'm so bad.
Sure, but like at your agency, Open Book,
Mm-hmm.
I know you said you had a lot of people you looked up to that had good design sense. Is that where a lot of that began?
I think so. I mean, I think like it's hard to find good animation that has like bad design. I mean, like I was getting all my inspiration from like Wine After Coffee and Motionographer, and I mean, you can take bad design and animate it well, but like it's still gonna look bad. And so I think like a lot of my design sense came through animation, honestly, and studying like good animation. And then, yeah, like Open Book, having people look over my shoulder and be like, this should look this way, and says like, oh, that looks better. And so it's like more been like instinct. Like I can look at somebody else's design and make it better. Put me in front of a blank Photoshop thing and no, it's scary. But I'm just like, that's not a strength of mine, and that's fine. I don't have to be good at that. You have a question too? I love questions. Yes, you haven't asked one yet.
A lot of your rigs have the just basic shapes or shape layers, whatever. What is your process for applying the different gradients and textures and noises over?
Yeah. It depends. I use shape layers for pretty much anything and everything. Because of this thing called set mat. So that like, make this a different color. Does this have FX? Oh, it doesn't have FX console. Matt, nope. I've never used the menu anymore. It's the weirdest thing. Okay, so basically it allows you, it's like an alpha map, but you can just take like another layer and mat it. So if I were to put like a gradient ramp on this shape layer, like actually what I could do would be to just create a shape layer that is the size of the whole comp and then apply that set mat to that. So it's like stuck on this one layer, right? And then, I could give this like a gradient fill or something. Another thing that you can do sometimes too is with expressions, you can create nulls and then link those gradient points to nulls if you want to animate the gradient. And that just gives you a little bit more flexibility. But then like I could just lock that layer and this thing would just move around and have the gradient on it, and I don't really have to worry about it. So yeah.
Same approach you did when adding the gradients to your Cinema 4D comp with all the spheres?
Oh yeah, so for that, like I had an object pass for every one of those spheres. And I had like the position and scale data from like nulls like baked out of it. So I basically just had to take a 2D circle, make it 3D and comp it onto like parent it to that null so it would move with it, and then luma mat it to the other thing. And then because I was like matching the specular of the 2D stuff to like the 3D specular pass, it looked acceptable 3D wise.
Okay, Danny, one last question.
Well, she kind of asked it. Okay. I was going to say, like, advanced, like, your favorite one or two tips for adding texture and shading to
Shading.
objects as a post essentially.
Yeah, I definitely use set mat. Again, like these the shading on like the side of these boxes here is just all these things, and they're all being like set matte onto. So like without it, it starts to look a lot more 2D, and that's just using set matte on top of those other things. Yeah, I really like using like nulls on the like position points of gradients because, again, like gradients in the real world would be caused by like natural like lighting, and so they're going to move as the object moves. And so like maybe it's a style thing. I just hate it when like there's a texture and it's like obviously just like flat on top of like a character moving around. I'm sure it's so much effort to make it move with it, but I'm like, nothing looks like that. Why does it look like that? But that's because I have like really strong feelings about things that are like really not that important. So yeah, I like being able to animate the things along with, like I would generally rather have more control than leave things up to like just sticking it on as a matte. I know a lot of people use Ray Dynamic Texture, which is a helpful plugin that lets you just like create a library of textures and then like one click apply it. But yeah, I end up just using a lot of like alpha mattes or set mattes when I can. Or just like the Photoshop layers. I mean, we just did a project that I think will probably come out soon, but these like animated rings that were spinning super fast, and like they had been designed to look like they were spinning super fast, and I was like, I'm not gonna recreate these in After Effects and then like animate them as spinning at like 5,000 degrees a second, so I'm just gonna take the flat layer and move it, and you know, like, so yeah, I think, I don't know. Does that help? I don't know, it's like kind of a random. Yeah. So, is the live stream still on? 'Cause we're trying to keep this a little bit under wraps. Okay.
Can we cut away to anything? Yeah. Yeah, can we do that right now?
Let me just make sure I have the link right. So